WorldView is a podcast where we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our worldview. If you watched some of our content before and liked it, please consider liking, subscribing, and donating on our Patreon. Today we're talking with Liz Brewer. Liz is a world-renowned events organizer and expert on social behavior and etiquette. She has been representing and managing events for companies, celebrities, politicians, and high-powered businessmen and women like Sir Richard Branson and Dame Shirley Bassey. Liz is the author of 2 books, The Party Bible and The Ultimate Guide to Party Planning and Etiquette, with the first being described by her client Ivana Trump as a masterclass in ritz, blitz, and glitz of entertaining. Liz, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Beatrice. Well, it's wonderful to be with WorldView, and it's a long time since I've been in Africa. I spent a lot of time in Zambia, and also before I got married, I was married to John Rendell, and he took me to show me where his lion called Christian sort of was relocated. So I have very happy memories of South Africa and Africa.
Well, it's wonderful to have you, and by all means, we'd like to, have you visit again, world permitting and pandemic permitting. It's such a wonderful place. We love tourists and people exploring. But in terms of more about you, we'd like to know how does the journey go to get into the world of etiquette?
Oh, good question. For 6 years, I did a program for ITV, 3 series for ITV, 2 for Channel 9 Australia, and 1, believe it or not, for Donald Trump's Trump TV. And it was called Ladette to Lady. And when I first agreed to do this program, I just finished my first book, which was really on party planning. Everything you wanted to know, never dared ask. And I remember thinking, oh, well, I'm going to teach these girls how to lay a table and how to write an invitation. I had no idea that I was going to be confronted with a bunch of unruly, badly behaved ladettes. And so it was a learning experience. And so over the course of doing the first series, which was 6-part, I quickly realized I had to teach everything from sexual etiquette to really behavior, social behavior. And even though it was portrayed as an old-fashioned finishing school, it was to do with a sort of social behavior in the modern day. And so having done the first or second series, I then was asked to write my second book, which was The Ultimate Guide to Party Planning and Etiquette. And that was, I was asked by Lady Colin Campbell, the infamous Georgie Campbell, who publishing company she had a share in was called Dynasty, and they asked me to do the second book, which I did. So I realized that in actual fact, etiquette and social behavior is very much to do with common sense. Where there's a rule, there's a reason. And if you sort of think about it intelligently, not to cause offense to anyone and to put others at ease, it is very much to do with using your common sense. So I wrote this book, and I did it in a way that everybody could sort of relate to it. It wasn't dictating, because as I always say, there is nobody up there saying to us guys down here, you have to do it this way. Thou shalt not put your elbows on the table. Well, why not? But there's a reason. And so I would explain the reasons. And in fact, over those 6 years when I was doing Ladette to Lady, the only way I could actually teach these girls was not by dictating, but actually showing them how it was common sense and how it made life easier and how it opened doors and put you in a good light. So I hope that answered your question.
It's a fantastic answer. I just have to know, do you then it's almost a teaching of the understanding of why certain actions mean certain things and the offense and the different, environments in which people might find them.
It is.
Is it always linked to a culture? Is it more broad than that? I'm just interested in that specifically.
Interesting question, because a link to a culture, different countries have different ways of behavior. And, whereas you may do a certain thing in one country, that would probably be incorrect in another. A bit like tipping. You give somebody, a taxi driver, a tip in Japan and they'll throw it back at you. Here, they'll slam the door on you if you don't give them a tip. Yeah. So, that you have to, if you are traveling a lot, you have to actually find out what the basic values and sort of etiquette rules and regulations are in any particular country.
Yeah, it's when in Rome, you do as the Romans, the type of scenario.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely.
But I mean, of course, there's lots of people that travel internationally, for business or as officials.
Yes.
And, without naming any names, I'm pretty sure you have a couple of interesting stories about how some public officials at a public function, they messed up a bit. They completely went outside the bars of normal social etiquette. Do you have any funny moments in particular that you can remember?
Well, yes, and how? And I suppose that's why, whoever they are, at the end of the day, they're human beings. And that's why they have somebody like me around guiding them. When I took Ivana Trump on as a client, which was now about 30 years ago, she is still my client, I might add. And it was quite interesting because she just divorced Donald. And of course, she had three children, two sons and a daughter, Ivanka, Donnie, and what I used to call Little Eric because he was so short, but now he's over 6 foot. And I remember, she approached me and cold called me, and we went for lunch at Harry's Bar. It's a club in London. And I remember being fascinated as to why she would call me, but she just said, "Ah, well, Lizzie, everybody says I have made so many mistakes. I must speak to you." And it wasn't that she'd made mistakes. It's just that there's a different way of behaving in, say, New York, at social functions or even in private. And it's different. And you come to this country and the Brits are a bit reserved. And, you can go and get yourself a house or a cottage in the country somewhere, and you are still the new person in the village after 30 years. So we are very reserved, and we take quite a lot of time to get to know. And I think we do it to protect ourselves in some way. We're suspicious of other people coming into our area, as it were. And so you have we have also something called decaying elegance. Our castles and stately homes of England, they're kept together sometimes with bits of string. But that's what the Brits are like. We don't feel it's necessary to have new furnishings, new curtains. If we're comfortable in our own skins, there has been a lot of new money. And when you get new money, you feel you've got to have the park gates. You've got to have, the new car, the new furniture, the new this and that. In actual fact, that's not important. It's who you are and what you contribute to this world and what you've got to say for yourself. And as I say, feel comfortable. So you don't have to go out and buy the latest Wellingtons and, all-proof country jackets. It's better if they're looking a bit shabby, because that's what's understood. And
more respectable.
with somebody like Ivana, when she came here, her skirts were too short, they were too flouncy, she was too over the top, and she realized that something was wrong and just needed some guidance. And also, whatever you might think, English wasn't that good, and therefore misunderstanding, because us Brits speak a strange language. We talk about the weather incessantly. Well, it's either going to be rainy, it's going to be cloudy, or it's going to be sunny or gale. But we talk about the weather. It's called English speak, as it were, and it's to do with making people feel comfortable, communicating, but at the same time, as it were, showing that other person, I want to talk to you, but we're going to talk about the weather. We've talked about the weather. It's quite an extraordinary, and there are strange things which we do, and therefore I was a guide, really, and sort of guiding and organizing and bringing people in. So we've come to live in London. The best and most fun places are those that are difficult to get into. You've got to be a member of this club or a member of that club, or you've got to be invited. And therefore, I'd be a shortcut. I opened doors. So
and created opportunities for her.
You create opportunities, but it's a question of opening doors, or it's very easy for somebody to be the go-between. And because I've been around for such a long time, and when I first started, I actually ran away from home, and which is a whole other story. But I did. There was a world out there that I wanted to be part of, and I had just done what we called in this country the season. I'd been a debutante. So, I'd been groomed to how to get in the car correctly, how to walk up and down stairs, how to hold an umbrella, how to use a knife and fork. And of course, with the intention of getting married. It's like an arranged marriage. You go back to when I was a teenager. And instead of doing that, I did the cookery course, I did the homemaking course, I did the secretarial course, but it wasn't my intention at that time to get married. There was too big a world. So I ran away from home, and I actually started the very first discotheque club in Portugal, in the Algarve. And through that, at a very, very young age, not having anything to lose, I really learned that when you faced a problem, you tackled it and you got over it. You didn't. Nowadays, I'd be careful because I got too much to lose. But in those days, I had nothing. I was young and I wanted to live in the sunshine, and I wanted to play the latest music and have all my friends around. I have a jolly good time and made quite a lot of money. And it was through that, it lasted 10 years, and there was a huge amount of publicity. And it did sort of, my club, it was called 7 and 7.5 in Albufeira. There have been a few books written about it, but it did open up the Algarve, which until then hadn't been really, they hadn't entertained the idea of having any tourism. So suddenly this focus of this girl who'd run away from home, who was a deb, and she brought her friends. Suddenly this was a whole new experience among the people who lived in the Algarve, who were all fishermen and seamstresses, and you couldn't buy anything. I had to take everything with me, and the records that I played were all smuggled in. So many stories here I can't even begin to tell you, but it's how I met Elton John, it's how I met Cilla Black, a lot of the people who 20 years later became household names.
Yes, of course.
And so it's quite interesting that, in a way, because we've had this horrendous virus going on, and these lockdowns. And for the last year, I have in fact spent nearly 24/7 writing my book and going through. So I have sort of virtually relived my life over these last months since the middle of last March. And for some inexplicable reason, I kept everything. So I kept every invitation, I kept every file, and I have had hundreds of clients. And one of them actually was on your show, Eric Way.
Yes.
And I remember when I met Eric Way, it was total coincidence, but I was doing a big premiere. Well, actually, it was a big event for Cameron Mackintosh, and it was called Hey, Mr. Producer. And it was a charity night, which turned into 2 nights, of which he selected cameos of every show he'd ever put on. And it was at the London, wasn't it the London Palladium? Trying to think where it was, but wherever it was, the Queen was coming. And I was doing the special guest, VIP guests, and putting it on, and it was benefiting, I think it was a charity for the deaf. And I remember that I'd been so busy organizing all this that I suddenly realized that night I hadn't got a gown to wear, I hadn't got my evening dress. And I rushed into a friend's shop, and she was representing a load of new designers. And I went and I said, I've got to have a dress. And she said, oh, well, this is a new designer who's come in, he's from South Africa, and there's some dresses there that might suit you. And I just looked at this one dress, and I still have it, and it was sort of silver crochet to the waist and then long black skirt, and it was absolutely beautiful. So I took it, and that evening, I remember I was wearing it. Actually, no, before that evening, the designer, I said, well, I need to borrow it. So she said, well, you've just missed the designer, Eric Way. So she gave me the number. I rang him and I said, look, I'm doing this party. And he said, and I explained I was with Ivana Trump, Dame Shirley, Bassey, Cameron Mackintosh, and quite a few celebrities. And he said, of course, he said, in fact, you can have it if you introduce me to Shirley Bassey or Ivana. And so I said, done. Well, I can tell you, not only did he meet them, but it was the dame who said, I want that dress. And I said, well, I'm sorry, this is my dress. So anyway, but to cut a very long story short, he did. I introduced him, and he dressed me for the next however many years he was here, for Ascot, for all the big events. And actually through him, I also became a judge for Miss England, and twice.
Twice, yeah. I mean,
So,
Eric was such a wonderful guest to talk to. He's
lovely. Yeah,
he's also such a practical, entrepreneur. It's like he knew that he could give the dress to you, and then just as an absolute stepping stone to the wonderful world of context that you have, and that further catapults him as well. You mentioned that you write a lot of books, some of which we've mentioned at the start of the show, either all your experiences and now of your life, which we're very much looking forward to reading one day soon. But specifically the ones that we went to the start, the ones I'd say you're most known for, the Party Guide and also the Ultimate Guide to Party Planning and Etiquette. What exactly do these books focus on in terms of partying? Because it's a quite encompassing term.
Well, as I said before, it is to do with common sense. It's everything. A lot of people, they're terrified of giving a party. And so what it explained was, you first of all, if you having to give a party or want to give a party, two things different. It's like a seed and it grows. So first of all, you dream the event. So I used to explain, in your mind, you dream from the reason why you're doing it, who you're going to invite, how they're going to know about it, the invitation, what the invitation has to convey, and then how the guests will get there, where they're going, the time, the date, and when they arrive, who takes their coats, have you got lavatory paper in the loo? So, and the duties of the guest, the duties of the host. And it's not just, good parties don't happen by accident. It's to do with attention to detail and thinking all the time of sort of what could go wrong. You know, if the lights go off, have you got candles? And also with your guest, the most important thing for a host is to introduce the guests. You know, how many times do you arrive at an occasion and the host says, oh, wonderful to see you, get yourself a drink, I'm sure you'll know lots of people, and you walk into a room and you don't know a soul.
Yeah.
And so it's explaining why you should introduce people and how you go about it, even if you have to, you know, greet every guest, allocate friends, how you have the attention to detail. It's not just about content, it's about making certain that the guest list is sugar and spice. All of a kind is boring. You know, imagine 25 lawyers. You've got to have time. And it's the same when people say, oh, the decor, the lighting, yeah, it all helps, and food and drink. But what is important is the mixture of people. What you remember after an amazing event, what you go away with is really the experience of who you've met, the conversations you've had, which are indelible and stay there. And my advice has always been, you know, when you go to an event, don't go straight to the person you know and hog them the whole evening. Make certain that you circulate and how you do that. And if you do meet somebody who thinks amazing, again, take their name and number, meet them another time, take advantage of being able to circulate. As your duty as a guest is to do that. Yeah. Your duty is to jolly well enjoy yourself, have a good time, but also to give of yourself, because you are one of the ingredients of that party. Yeah. So that's also, it just makes it, what it's about.
It's so much, all the elements that you now mentioned is extremely practical, but also just really insightful. It just makes so much sense that when you go to a party, it doesn't matter how lavish it is, and the one that all the tableaus talk about in terms of, you know, the dresses and everything else, but the people are the ones that stick with you. Everything else is relatively short-lived.
Absolutely. And that's what you remember. That's right, totally exactly, what you remember. Which is why you make an effort. Which is why, you know, you think about one of the great ingredients is obviously to have a dress code, or so people know what to wear, or to have a theme, because then you break the ice. People have got something to talk about.
You provide commonality.
Yeah, and so those are the kind of things you're including in order to make it a great occasion.
And just in terms of how, so the theme is one thing you've mentioned that you create to have something for them to talk about, you know, and an environment that creates where the salt and spice mixes and the people get to know each other. What's one of the biggest events that you've planned, and in what way did you specifically design it so that people have, you know, a better time with each other and get to know each other?
First of all, you've got to really love putting people together. You've got to love creating an atmosphere. If you don't enjoy it, you're not going to be any good at it. So you've got to really love what you're doing. And then it always depends on what the purpose is for that particular occasion. There are different reasons that people entertain. So when you know all that, and you know the host and what they expect, then in fact you sort of design something around that. This is very much to do with my first book, The Party Bible. My second book was really to do far more with behavior. Everything, even though that second book I wrote 10 years ago now, but it was to do, I even had a sort of a whole page or chapter on really on sort of things like social networking. Even though if you go back 10 years, it wasn't all that big at the time. But I remember saying, you know, what do I think of social networking? What do I think about these various ways of which we now take for granted, like Facebook and Instagram? And I said, what do I think of it? I think it's a brilliant tool. But you have to learn to use it to your advantage. It's not a substitute for life.
No. Yeah.
And
yeah.
I know I do. I have, you know, I have a Facebook page. I do a bit of Instagram. But I try and use it. I don't want people to live vicariously through me. And I know there are a lot of people who do. I'm very flattered. But what I try and do is put a message there, or usually there's something else that I'm promoting or talking about. So I use it as a tool. And that's quite important.
There is very much a ceiling to things like social media in terms of the quality of interaction that you can have there. So there's no substitute for meeting that person in person or partying with them or getting to know them, talking with each other. Because, you know, there's no going beyond whichever limit Facebook gives. So there's no substitute for life, as you said.
No, it's not. And also, I find a lot of these photographing here
yes.
slightly boring.
Yes, no, definitely.
There are in London especially, there are quite a few what I call the women who lunch. And it just, all they're doing all the time is just, got to have a photograph here.
And of the lunch. All the photographs of the lunch as well.
That's right.
Yeah, no, it's I also want to say, you know, there is a different perspective in terms of, I want to say, generations, but also because we have access to things like social media and we can see so many different cultures in the world, we might get a very one-sided view of things. So there are people that have the opinion that, you know, the state that etiquette and this proper way of doing things is oftentimes, you know, snobbish and a sign of elitism. You know, they have the connotation with it. What do you say about that statement?
Definitely not. It's etiquette or social behavior is a way of behaving. So you make other people feel comfortable. You put people at ease. You don't cause offense. It's nothing to do with being elitist. It's nothing to do with being superior. It's to do with actually a leveling off. You know, behavior it's so important in society. When you have a breakdown of behavior, wars begin.
Yes.
You have to respect other people's way of being. You have to understand that not everybody feels confident. People need help, especially now with this pandemic that we've had, and you've got loads of young people only communicating through, you know, social media and virtual platforms. You know, we are animals, and animals need to really feel and be with others. So the electronic connection isn't a very good substitute, but it's a sufficient substitute because of what we're going through. But what we have to understand is when we are eventually together again as human beings and mingling, we have to know how to behave, because people take exception, people take offense on things that sometimes we have no control of, or we are totally doing it unintentionally. We're totally unaware of what we've done to cause an offense. And the whole idea of having manners or knowing how to behave, funnily enough, I did a couple of programs with BBC this morning, and one of them was to do with, there was an incident in Parliament where Theresa May, somebody had taken her seat, and I was being asked, should a man give a woman a seat, and should they open a door for a woman? And I was trying to explain that, I grew up at an age where, people had charm, and people were courteous and gallant, and yes, they opened the doors and they helped you on with your coat. And in actual fact, in life, it gets you a lot further than expecting, taking somebody's seat and expecting an elderly person to stand. It's the question of actually considering others, and it makes life happier and easier. And I think it's something that when somebody says, oh, well, etiquette is to do with being elitist, it's nothing whatsoever to do with elitist. There are some guidelines. They're not rules, which, as I've said before, that it's not a rule, but it's a guideline of how to behave. And if you think about it, does it make that person feel more comfortable? Does it put them at ease? Does it mean that we're actually thinking about them and considering them?
That also means that it's more dynamic, right? Because I mean, if the purpose of etiquette is to make someone feel comfortable and facilitate, just a greater conversation and a greater connecting of peoples, then it's also dynamic, meaning it has to change. It's not rules specifically connected to one people, one culture, but rather you have to find out what that person likes, and you have to have the structure to be able to be comfortable with that person and make them feel comfortable.
That's right. Absolutely.
And so also there's, a big difference between, of course, what makes a casual conversation between, say, me and my friends and you and I, for example, but also between, I'd say, royalty or upper class people. There's a different type of status quo there, and business people. What would you say is the biggest difference between those type of groups of people?
You've mentioned royalty, and there's a complete difference between protocol and etiquette and social behavior. Protocol is to do with giving an order to things. Right. What your position is in the working part of your life. So it shows you where you should be standing, where you should be sitting, who comes in first, who's introduced, who is lucky enough to be spoken to by the royalty. It's to do with protocol, and that is a guideline. That is set down in black and white, how you behave. If you're lucky enough to be presented at court, how you go about it, it's written down. With etiquette, which is social behavior, etiquette is to do, as I said, it's to do with putting a value on things, putting a value on and understanding behavior, understanding why you should, if there's a woman coming into the room, you might feel like standing up if you're sitting down. If she's trying to put her coat on, you should feel, well, let me help her. It's not that she's the weaker person, it's just that men are men and women are women. And since the day began, women have been the ones traditionally who created the nest, and men have been the ones that went out and brought in the food and brought in the heavy wood to create a home. And so going right back to that throughout life, you know, we are biologically programmed to recreate, to create the nest, women. And men are biologically programmed to procreate, which is why if they see a woman with good breasts, they look at them because there's a milk for my babies. Good hips, that means childbearing hips. They don't know that, but they're biologically programmed. That's what they think. They can't help it. Whatever their sexual preferences, it is there biologically inside them, their DNA, as it were.
And so the etiquette is how we go about interpreting our biological impulses in an environment that makes people feel comfortable. So even though you have those impulses, you want to create a scenario where you don't make someone feel uncomfortable, you actually increase the probability of having a good relationship with that person.
It's all to do with how people feel, making people feel comfortable, putting people at ease. That's what it's, and not causing offense. And, the world that we're now in, we need that more and more to keep harmony.
I also just want to comment on the first thing you said in the fact that there's a difference between protocol and etiquette. I feel like that's something, at least I didn't know it. So that was, insightful to me, is I think people connect protocol with the elitism and snobism, and they confuse protocol and etiquette because, protocol goes with being rich or high in status or something like that. So that's why it's connected with etiquette. But in fact,
very
you
much
just
so.
clearly defined there's a difference between the two.
And to do with town halls and councils and parliaments, there's an order, and that's protocol. That it's guided by, who sits where and who comes in first and who carries the baton or the flag, or it's to do with protocol.
As you've mentioned, the most important ingredient of any party is the people. Does that also make the people the most difficult part of planning a party? Or what would you say is the most difficult part? Is it rather bureaucracy?
Yeah, but the guest list is very, very important. Don't just invite somebody because you need to return hospitality. If they're a party pooper, entertain them at another time, because otherwise somebody's going to be landed with that person who may be disagreeable. You can do that yourself. So yeah, the guest list is all important. It's the first thing that you think about.
And I think there was a show, I think it's called The Crown. I think it's currently on Netflix. And when we talked to a makeup artist, and also, of course, talk to Eric Way about this, that it's sometimes, for those of us that never really see any famous person or person of royalty in person, at least from our perspective, it's easy to forget that, people such as yourself have a lot of interaction with them. You're coaches with them. You go on a really personal level with these people. In your opinion, why do people that don't understand that environment, that world, sometimes see royalty, like in The Crown, as a bit dysfunctional, as not normal? It's not the way that we act, and we find that very strange. Is it simply just a difference of appearance, or what exactly is that environment that creates such a disconnect between the two groups?
It's very sad that the Crown has interpreted the royal family in the light that it has. It is pure entertainment. It is not fact. It's way away from the truth. And in fact, I couldn't in the end watch it. I mean, I knew too much about the reality of what went on to look at this and think, well, it should never have been based on our royal family, because a lot of it was totally fictitious. There was another series which came on, which is actually hysterical, called Bridgerton. And so wonderful. And a lot of the time, totally inappropriate, but wonderful entertainment. And there you understand it's far from the truth. But it didn't matter, because it was pure entertainment. What they did with The Crown was really, it's almost as if somebody had decided to really bring down our royal family. That's what I felt. I couldn't watch it in the end. I stopped watching it. It was a shame.
I mean, if it's just for pure entertainment, do you feel like it should either be made clear that this is the fact, or do you think that people are smart enough to realize that this is? Because it does shape
they
perceptions.
managed to get the message over perfectly clearly with Bridgerton,
right?
Without it, causing offence.
Yeah.
So of course it's possible, and I'm delighted to know there's going to be another series. But we have a royal family. And thank goodness, I mean, we have a royal family which brings in huge amount of money into this country.
Yes.
Enormous. The changing of the guards. Tourists come here because of that, because of our palaces and our castles and that sort of tradition, the pomp and ceremony that we have. And, it's a huge source of income to us. But not only that, they set an example. And up until recently, with some of the younger members, it's been something that a lot of people have been proud of and have based their lifestyle around following that guide, as it were. And so it's a shame that you've got a series on television which is trying to sort of debase it and bring it down.
So if you mentioned Brighton now, for example, but do you perhaps have a different media or movie perhaps that you remember that more, you want to say, accurately represents their life? I know, for example, for me, The King's Speech is one of my all-time favorite films. And that showed, a different era of royalty, of course, but that also showed some of the more human struggles that they go through and the way and the class in which they interpret that, and the fantastic effect that it had for King George V. So do you have examples like those, but maybe more?
Yeah, it was brilliantly interpreted as well. Brilliant acting, very well interpreted. And therefore, you didn't come away with that feeling of, okay, a lot of people didn't realize he had that speech impediment. It was factual, but you didn't feel it was debasing, as it were, the royal family or him, or it was sort of added something to history rather than detracting from it.
And I think it also inspired young generations. I know for a fact that, a lot of people of my age and younger, we kind of harken back to the days where people, at least in very high positions, had a lot of class. They had a lot of good way of doing things. There was somebody to look up to and somebody to base their life around, like you mentioned. And so, those type of media have a gigantic effect because that's what we consume a lot of. That's why.
But also, we had series over the years and years. Something which you probably don't remember, Upstairs, Downstairs, which explained life as it used to be. There was a downstairs which was controlled and run, and people were proud to be there. The butlers and the head butler, and there was the upstairs, and they were proud of each other, as it were. It seems to have disappeared now. And well, fortunately, we're going into an age where we've got robots who can start taking over because nobody wants to be downstairs any longer. It makes life, a bit difficult. And then people complain when we're going into an age with robots and artificial intelligence. And it's frightening, but at the same time, we as a people, we're the ones that make this happen.
Yes.
And so we have to accept this process. It's progress.
Yeah. It's actually fantastic you mentioned robots. It's something I haven't thought about at all before. But what do you think about robot etiquette? Is that something that we program them into, or will they naturally take the disposition
or teaching them how to behave?
Yes, because I mean, they would be like children initially, not knowing. So you'd have to teach them somehow, right?
Of course. Well, somebody programs them.
Right.
So they will be programmed, But the terrifying thing is eventually robots will program themselves and they'll decide how they're going to behave. That's the frightening aspect of artificial intelligence, because eventually they'll get rid of us. So they won't need us.
That's the fear. Yes, yeah, no, but I also feel like
It's
it
not a
might be a
fear,
scenario.
it's a fact. They won't
Right.
need
Yes.
it, and it's
No.
fact.
Yeah. And
And
there's also a bit of a fear in a certain situation where these could either be people that robots could be something that advance more quickly than we could possibly adapt, or they could be like children where they just simply don't know why they're destroying us, but they are. It's kind of like a very big unknown.
I think they will become very intelligent. I think they
Yes.
will, and of course they won't be affected by any of these epidemics. They will outlive us.
Yeah.
We'll have
Getting back
we'll have
to
to go to the moon or somewhere.
yes, there we go. We'll escape to Mars.
Yeah,
There'll be
a great
Mars
friend of
etiquette, I'm
mine
sure.
was one of the first astronauts to land on the moon, Buzz Aldrin. Actually, a great friend, and I helped him a great deal in this country. And I remember when I first met him, which was many years ago, and like anybody meeting a man who's been on the moon for the first time, I sort of cornered him and asked him, nobody else got a word in. For an hour, I cornered him and asked him every question that you would want to ask a man who's been on the moon. And I do remember at one point saying to him, yes, but Bassey, you're up there looking at us down here. And there must be some incredible thoughts that went through your mind.
Yeah.
And he said, Liz, I was thinking about that tax form I had to complete when I got back.
Really? Tax form?
And I remember thinking, and I don't think he was pulling my leg. I mean, he was very dry, and it was just the most enlightening moment that that guy on the moon was thinking about a tax return.
Yes,
yeah, interesting.
That's amazing. I'm a huge fan of of that entire era and of their work. Those guys were absolute. I think some of the bravest souls in humanity, going up to the utter unknown.
And I remember saying to him, by the way, when we do get up there eventually, even if we get to, I have to do the first party.
Yes, no, definitely. Yeah, we'll have a disco on the moon for sure. So I just have to know, in terms of current events, so we've touched on it a couple of times now, but making people feel comfortable is almost the basis of how we choose to interact in a pandemic, because we have masks on, and some people they don't really care, or they feel young, meaning that doesn't really affect them, so they're happy to shake your hand, but you're really not. So there's always, every day, with every single interaction you have with someone, you have this weird couple of seconds with, okay, do we fist bump, do we not stand close, do we masks, not masks? It's a weird environment. How do you feel? I'm assuming etiquette has been permanently changed, but how do you feel? Will we go back? Is it permanent, or what's the future here in terms of how we interact with each other?
Well,
I feel like we're all uncomfortable suddenly.
Well, it's a very difficult question. I mean, it's been a learning process for everyone. And to begin with, no, we felt that, well, people die of flu. Yes. And including our prime minister, who, wouldn't wear a mask. And we've learned the hard way that finally we have to take it seriously. And it's not just protecting ourselves, it's protecting others.
Yeah.
And therefore, what has happened is, fortunately, they've now got, a vaccine. And we have to hope that all these different vaccines that they've discovered and created are going to protect us, so that eventually, if we've all had the vaccine, or those of us that are still alive, then we will, when you say get back to normal, life is never going to be the same as it was. Yeah. I mean, during these last, how many months is it from last March? It's about 10 months. Reliving my life, which is what I've done. Totally. I mean, if you saw the files and the press cuttings and the videos, and I mean, it's so much stuff. And it's taken time, because I literally have relived my life. And it's been an extraordinary life, and it's been full of it could be 7 volumes. And coming across stuff that I'd sort of forgotten about. And I'm talking to various people who are interested in being involved in the book. And I remember them saying, well, it's the stories, because those stories, it's like part of history. Life is never going to be the same.
Yes.
Yeah. And therefore it needs to be recorded. And I remember picking up, because Richard Branson was my client, and I helped launch his island, Necker, and various other of his businesses. He had a boat on the Thames called the Virginian, and I remember with the island before, and sadly it burnt, his house burnt down. But I remember being there, and at the time I was with my ex-husband and John Renville, and I remember you become very territorial. You're on an island, and it's a private island, and it's an amazing island. It's so beautiful. And I was in the sea, but you got tourists that would come along, and they felt they had the right to come and be on your private beach. Because when you're on, even it's Richard Branson's island, but you'd be on your island,
yes,
just with the people looking after you. Yeah. And there would be four tourists came, this little motorboat from another island. I'm in the sea. So we're going back a number of years, it's 30 odd, 35 years or so. And I remember sort of looking at these people and saying, excuse me, this is a private island. And they said in their American accents that they had every right to be there, and they're going up to the shoreline. And I said, absolutely. And I very slowly, because I just had a baby, and I'd been breastfeeding, but I was slim and my hair was right down to below my waist. And I very slowly, deliberately came out of the sea. I was stark naked. And these American tourists, who were a bit like British tourists abroad, they were there and they got their rights. And the women, the two women with their husbands, they were so cross, they telling their husbands to get out of the, get the boat out as soon as possible, as I strode onto the beach. And I then just lay down, and I actually had the photograph, because my husband then, John, took the photograph. And it's very delicate and very nice. And I remember showing this, that's got to be in the book. I said, well, all these clients, there are stories, all of them. Yeah. And it's when you're writing a book, it's the stories which make you laugh. And then they are fairly unique and unexpected that people want to read. They don't want to read the fact that I've had hundreds of clients and done this. What they want are those stories. So reliving my life like that, I realized that was so special. And I don't think we'll have life like that again. It'll be different. It's going to be different. It's going to be, in many areas, quite new. What's going to happen to the theatre? What's going to happen? The film world, of course, even though the cinemas have been affected. My brother's in the film industry, and he makes films on all the big famous musicians. And he says they're doing business because people are sitting at home watching movies. Yes. And but it's the theatre which I'm hoping won't be destroyed. It's the entertainment where people, we socialize. We need to get together. We need to have fun. We need to play sports together. We need to, as I said, we are animals. We need to get together and with whatever we're doing. So hopefully slowly things will, you know, come back.
Mm.
In our country, I don't know how it's affected you, but, you know, a lot of the businesses have gone under,
Yes.
and will continue to do so.
Mm.
When I drive down King's Road, I'm quite near, I'm in Chelsea, and you see shop after shop have closed,
Yeah.
and won't be opening. So it's an
not going back.
experience we're living through, and I don't think anybody can sort of look into the future.
Now, these are also, you know, part of the stories and life experiences. Is I'm pretty sure, you know, even after years this, where you've looked retrospectively, you're constantly making new experiences as well. I'm assuming going to write more than one book. Or
Oh, very much so. It's
Yeah.
not just me. I mean, my daughter,
Yeah.
who has made 4 albums, and actually she came out to South Africa, and she was there staying with Eric, and and she was staying in a health spa, I think it was in a spa, and this was the beginning of last year, I think it was, and she was supposed to come stay longer, and she came back. Otherwise, she'd probably still be there. And she came back. She'd made her albums, but because she does singing bowls and gongs and vibration and yoga, she teaches, and qigong. Well, she of course has gone forward, and she does every day. She's doing people go online and sing and dance and really relax with her, because a lot of people have been affected mentally, and this sort of thing helps. Now that's a young person who's created a new business, and I think that will happen in the same way as with fashion. You know, fashion had become out of control, the luxury market, whereas we were judging people by the label they were wearing, the trainers they were wearing, the handbag they were holding. I think what's happened is this has brought people down to a level whereby we're not so much noticing the label they're wearing, the trainers that they've got on. We're noticing them as a person and what they're contributing, you know, their sense of humor, what they've got to say. Is it a song? Is it a poem? You know, are they jumping up and down? But it's creating something.
Yeah.
We're judging people really now by their contribution to what we're going through. And so I think definitely what will be affected is, you know, the luxury items, which, I mean, I have a top floor here where the first month when we locked down, I color coded, design coded, and I looked at this collection of clothes, which, because as I say, I never throw anything away, and unless it's worn out. And looking at these, I think, oh, they're just so wonderful. Will I ever wear them again? You know, and that's a thought. Will I ever wear them again? Who knows? I don't think people will be going out and spending £15,000 on a handbag again for a long time. Just people collecting. But
But I think that's a way in which, you know, it gives room for some new experiences, some new things to gain the light of day. But also in the same sense, since they're not constantly buying new things, they're also giving older things, you know, a more appreciation and more time to shine.
And also recycling, because we were getting to a state whereby we just kept throwing things away. And I grew up at a time, you know, it was after the war, when my parents, you know, they never threw anything away. Everything was recycled, jars and paper, and everything was kept. And I think that's happened again now. I think people are now, you know, they're appreciating the fact that we cannot keep throwing things away, and therefore we're learning to recycle. So rather than having to keep buying clothes and buying, we're learning how to adapt them or how to use them in another way.
Well, that's such a positive note to end on. I wanted to give you a last experience to say anything or plug anything, perhaps a time when your new book's coming out. Anything else?
When I've written it.
Wonderful. Okay,
And
okay.
what I've done is I have managed to index all the files, and now going through and putting the stories there. And then I have to sit down with somebody who is wiser than me to find out, what I have to bring out. There were 6 ex-fiancés, and the only person who's still a bit sore is my ex-husband, who incidentally, you may be interested to know, John, he had a lion called Christian. They made a big film about this lion. And when I met John, and I was actually launching a dining club in London, and he was the partner of Roddy Llewellyn. And Roddy was a landscape gardener, and he just started his relationship with Princess Margaret. And I was just about to launch this dining club and in Battersea. And I remember meeting this guy, John Rendell, and he was telling me about how he'd bought this baby lion at Harrods, and how it had got too big for them to keep, so they'd had to rehabilitate the lion in Africa with George Adamson, and how they made a film, etc. And I remember thinking at the time, I was on my 6th fiancé, and 2 or 3 of those slightly overlapped. And I remember thinking, if he's lived with a lion, man for me. And so I'm
with a lioness.
and my daughter Tallulah is the result, which was sensational.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Well, it's been absolutely wonderful to talk to you. It's the stories have been interesting and eye-opening also in the differences that we might have a perception on protocol and etiquette. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a wonderful time to chat to you.
Not at all. Not at all. Thank you.
So for our viewers, this has been WorldView. If you've made it thus far, you most definitely enjoy the video. And of course, why not? We've had such a wonderful guest to talk to. We just want to say, of course, it helps out us out a lot to share and get more people to broaden their worldviews by looking at different perspectives. If you like and share this video, the almighty algorithm will favor it. And also, of course, to donate and support us on Patreon. Patreon is just a financial service that allows us to make more of these type of videos and talk to more people with higher quality entertainment. So thank you so much for watching. This has been WorldView.